We just wrapped up graduation season, and every year around this time, I notice the same strange thing happening in every post graduation celebration, every Instagram post with a cap and gown photo. We expect 18-year-olds to have their whole future figured out, pick a major, pick a career path, and by 22 be settled into a job, by 30 be married, own a house, be starting a family. We hand a teenager a life size decision and then act surprised when 20 years later, it doesn't fit anymore. And somehow, in the middle of all that expectation, we quietly assume that 18-year-old making those decisions, that exact brain, those exact values, that exact sense of what mattered, is going to be the same person living inside those decisions 2 decades later. Same person, same plan, no updates required. I don't know about you, but I am not remotely the person I was at 18, and my life does not look anything like what I had planned back then. Not even close. Welcome back to ICMM, Living Life Unpaused. I'm your host, Abby Ventrilo, and today we're talking about why the perfect plan, the one so many of us are still quietly waiting to finish writing, might be the exact thing keeping us stuck. And I want to be clear about something before we go any further. This isn't a knock on planning. I love a plan. I love a list, a calendar, a color-coded spreadsheet. This isn't me telling you to throw the whole idea out and just wing it. It's something narrower and I think more useful. I want to talk about the difference between the kind of planning that moves you forward and the kind that quietly becomes an excuse to stay exactly where you are, waiting for a version of certainty that's never actually coming. Let me start by telling you what my plan looked like, because I think it'll sound familiar. At 18, I was pre-law, history major, getting ready to take the LSAT, law school after that, and then a nice tidy career in corporate law. I could have drawn you the timeline. I knew which internships mattered. I knew the courses I needed. I had it all mapped out with the kind of confidence that only a teenager can have about a life she hasn't lived yet. I used to picture the exact office. I imagined what I'd wear to my first day. That's how real the plan felt. It wasn't a vague hope. It was a picture I'd been coloring in for years, and I fully expected to walk straight into it. And then I actually did the internship, and I hated it. I had this quiet, sinking realization that redlining contracts for 8 hours a day did absolutely nothing for me. No spark, no sense of rightness, just a countdown clock until 5 o'clock. That was the first crack in the plan, and it terrified me because the plan wasn't just a plan. It was my whole identity at that point. I started planning for this back when I was 14 and joined my high school debate team. Then at 16, I was selected for our county prosecutor's explorers team and researched case law and did mock trials. At 17, I shadowed a law school student and met with administrators to figure out exactly my educational plan. And here I was at 20, having a bit of an identity crisis and the whole blow your life up way, honestly. Because if I don't do this, what do I do? This whole plan needs to be thrown out, and I need to start over. Another reason plans change is life. Life happens and throws us a few curveballs. I also plan on having children. That one wasn't a career decision I could redirect with a different major. It was just something I assumed, the way that you assume the sun comes up. And life had other plans there too. I wasn't able to have children. And there is no clever reframe that makes that not hard. I'd paused my career, missed supporting friends, taking trips, because my life revolved around fertility appointments and treatments and shots and every little thing someone tried once that worked for them. I'm not going to pretend it was some hidden gift. It was a real loss and I carried it. But once again, I was at this point of, what do I do now? And here's what I've come to sit with. If I had followed my exact plan, the pre-law track, the corporate job, the family I assumed I'd have on the timeline I assumed I'd have it, this show wouldn't exist. Half the people I love wouldn't even be in my life. It's because of the scrapped law plan that I met my husband. The version of me who got everything on schedule never gets laid off, never sits in that kitchen wondering what's next, never has the conversation that turns into this podcast. I'm not telling you to say that everything happens for a reason. I'm telling you because the life that actually happened, the one built out of the plan breaking, is the one I wouldn't trade for the one I drew up at 18. I have friends who followed their 18-year-old plan almost exactly to the letter. Same field, same city, same trajectory that they had sketched out. And I want to say clearly, that's not a lesser life, and this episode isn't about convincing you that your plan has to blow up to count as a good one. Some people's theme really does stay in one lane the whole way through. And that's not failure to grow, that's just what growth looked like for them. What I'm after today isn't that plans are bad. It's that you don't have to wait until you have the perfect plan to live your life, to start the thing, to move forward. Here's where I think we get it wrong, and it's a mix-up that costs people years. We confuse planning with certainty. We think planning means I know exactly where I'm going, the destination, the timeline, the whole route mapped out before I take a single step. Real planning means something much smaller and much more useful. I know what my next step is. That's it. And those two things are not the same skill, even though we talk about them like they are. Think about the questions we actually spend our energy on. What am I supposed to do with my life forever? What's my purpose? What career should I have? Where will I live? Who will I marry? Who will I become? These are enormous questions, and most of us are trying to answer them from wherever we're standing right now, with the information we have right now, as if the answer is fixed and we just haven't found it yet. A lot of advice out there tells you to sit down and write out a 5-year plan. And I understand the appeal. It feels responsible. It feels like you're taking your life seriously. My problem with it is simpler than it sounds. And I know I've said this before, but we're asking questions that only a future version of us can actually answer, and then demanding that our current present-day self answer them today, with today's information, today's fears, today's limited imagination about what's even possible. So what happens is predictable. People wait. They sit down and build the plan. They refine the plan. They add columns and milestones and target dates. And it starts to feel like progress because it looks so official on paper. And then, because this is what life does, something happens that the plan didn't account for. A job disappears. A relationship ends. A health scare reorders your priorities overnight. And that's exactly where people get stuck. Not because the unexpected thing happened. Unexpected things always happen. But because they interpret it as evidence the plan failed. And they pause everything else in their life to drag that one piece back into line, instead of asking whether the plan needed to flex in the first place. So if not the 5-year plan, then what? I want to walk you through the 3 things I actually lean on now instead. Noticing your theme instead of your title, treating setbacks as a design feature instead of failure, and giving up on the idea that transformation happens the day you launch something. We'll take them one at a time, starting with a theme, because I think it's the one that quietly changes the most. Before I get to any of that, I want to name the thing underneath all of this, because I don't think we talk about it enough. We don't cling to 5-year plans because we're irrational. We cling to them because letting go of one feels like admitting we wasted the time we spent building it. If I spent 3 years on the law school track and I walk away from it, doesn't that mean 3 years were wasted? If I spent a decade in a career and I pivot, doesn't that erase the decade? I understand that fear intimately because I sat in it for a long time myself. And here's what finally moved me through it. Nothing you did on an earlier version of the plan gets erased when the plan changes. My friend asked me a question once. Would you have changed anything in your life, like where you went to school? And my answer was no, because it's honestly made me who I am today. My years in the corporate world have taught me more about what motivates people than I could ever get reading about in a book. The old plan isn't a wrong turn you erase, it's raw material. You don't throw out the last version, you build the next one on top of it. There's a second fear hiding right behind that first one, and it might be the bigger one. What will people think? Your parents asked you about what your 5-year plan was, and you told them. And now you're supposed to have some kind of accounting for why it changed. I think about my friend Jim here. He spent over 2 decades as a CFO, built an entire identity and a resume around it, and then walked away to open a fitness franchise. From the outside, as someone who only knew the resume, that probably sounded like he threw away the plan. But from the inside, it was the exact same theme: building something disciplined, coaching people toward a number that matters, running the operation with real rigor, and wearing a completely different job title. Nobody who actually knows Jim thinks he wasted his 20 years in finance. They watch him run that gym with the same precision that he used to run a balance sheet. So notice for a second whose voice is actually in your head when you imagine explaining a change of plan out loud. Sometimes it's genuinely someone specific: parents, a mentor, a version of a friend group maybe you've outgrown. And sometimes, if you're honest, it's nobody real at all. It's an imagined audience you built out of general anxiety. And that audience is not actually standing there with a clipboard, waiting to grade your explanation. Most people are far too busy narrating their own plan's plot twist to spend much time grading yours. So if the 5-year plan isn't the tool, what is? I'd offer this instead. Stop chasing the exact answer and start noticing the theme. Themes hold steady even when actual job titles and zip codes change completely underneath them. Someone whose theme is teaching might spend a decade as an actual classroom teacher, then become a manager who's really just teaching a team how to think, and then maybe a coach and an author or a consultant standing in front of a boardroom. On paper, those look like 5 unrelated careers. But underneath, it's the same person doing the same essential thing in 5 different rooms. Or think about someone whose theme is building, not construction necessarily, but the actual verb, the impulse to take raw material and shape it into something that works. That person might build furniture in one decade and build a company in the next, and maybe a nonprofit after that. And every well-meaning relative at Thanksgiving will ask why they keep changing direction, when from the inside, they haven't changed direction once. The theme was never the job title. The job title was just whatever container the theme happened to be living in that year. This takes me right back to the week I found out my job was being eliminated. I remember talking with Marcy almost immediately afterward, partly for comfort, honestly, and partly because I wanted someone to tell me everything was going to be fine. Instead, she does what Marcy does. She pulled up my birth chart, and she said something like, "I think this is a pivot. You need to do something that's actually helping people. Something where you get to be more creative, maybe writing, something that's a little bit more public, maybe." And I remember getting stuck on that, almost a little defensive about it, thinking, well, that's what I've already been doing for 20 years. I'm good at it. I had satisfaction there. Why would I go looking for something new when the old thing had a title I already knew? It wasn't until I let myself sit in the discomfort of not knowing, until I actually opened up to possibilities, that I looked twice at something like this show. Nothing about ICMM was on my 5-year plan. It wasn't even on my 5-month plan. It didn't even have a plan. It showed up because I finally let the theme lead instead of insisting on the exact same job title I'd always used to describe myself. And if you're listening to this trying to place your own theme, here's a shortcut. It's usually not the resume word. It's the verb underneath it. Not nurse, but the person who notices when someone's struggling before they say so. Not accountant, but the person who brings order to a mess nobody else wants to touch. Once you name the verb, you'll start seeing it everywhere in your own history. Not just your job history, but your whole history. The clubs you joined. The thing you do for free that you'd probably still do even if nobody paid you for the version that does pay. Once you can actually name your theme, the next question gets a lot easier. And it's the one I want to spend some real time on because I think it's where most of us are quietly getting it wrong. Underneath all of this is a belief most of us are carrying around without ever examining it. That when life doesn't follow the plan we laid out, that's a failure. This person's marriage didn't work out, failed. This person got laid off, failed, even though they had zero say in the decision. This person left their steady corporate job to build something on their own, reckless, or failed depending on how the story ends, as if we're only allowed to know whether a choice was a good one once we can see the ending. I'd rather borrow a different model for how I think about my own life, and it's one I lean on constantly now. Kaizen. Kaizen came out of Japanese manufacturing after World War II. It's the philosophy underneath the Toyota production system. And it was brought to the rest of the world by a man named Masaki Imai in a book he published in the 80s. But strip away the factory floor, and the idea is bigger and much more personal than an assembly line. Kaizen runs on a loop. Plan, do, check, adjust. And then you do it again. Not once, not as a launch, but as a permanent ongoing loop that never declares itself finished. Map that loop onto an actual life, and it looks almost embarrassing simple. Plan. Make your best guess at the next step. Do. You actually take it, instead of researching it for another 6 months. Check. You pay honest attention to what happened, not what you hoped would happen, what actually happened. And adjust. You use that information to make the next step a little bit better than the last one. Then you're back at plan again. Except now, you know more than you did the first time around. That's the whole cycle. It's not glamorous. It's also, as far as I can tell, the only thing that has ever reliably worked for me or for anyone I've watched build something that lasted. That loop is the whole point, and it's the opposite of how most of us were taught to think about our lives. We're taught to write the plan once, execute the plan once, then evaluate ourselves as either a success or a failure based on how closely reality matched the paper. Kaizen says, of course reality won't match the paper exactly. That's not the failure state. That's step 3. You check. You notice what actually happened, and you adjust. And the adjusting isn't a consolation prize. It's the entire mechanism by which anything gets better. I use this on the show constantly, if I'm honest. This format you're listening to right now isn't the plan I started out with. I second-guessed the solo episode structure more than once. I've changed how I do a cold open probably 4 or 5 times. I've switched my social media strategy more times than I can count. None of that was me failing to plan ICMM correctly. That was Kaizen, working exactly the way it's supposed to. Under this model, changing your mind isn't failure. It's evidence you were paying attention. It's evidence you were actually living your life instead of running a script on autopilot. It's not just the show either. I've done this with how I take care of myself, which took me a lot longer to admit than I'd like. I used to treat any change to a workout routine or an eating plan as a personal failure. I fell off. I couldn't stick with it. There was something wrong with my discipline, and I would scrap the whole thing. Kaizen reframed that completely. The plan wasn't supposed to survive contact with a busy season at work, or an injury, or just genuinely changing what my body needed at 40 versus what it needed at 25. Adjusting the plan wasn't quitting. It was the plan doing exactly its job. Here's the part of this that people find hardest to give themselves permission for. You're allowed to outgrow old dreams, not fail them, outgrow them. Sometimes you're chasing a goal that belonged to an earlier version of you, a version who had different information, different fears, a different sense of what was even possible. That doesn't make the dream wrong, and it doesn't make you flaky for setting it down. It just means you've changed, which, last I checked, is supposed to be the entire goal of getting older. My law plan is clearest version of this in my own life. 18-year-old me wasn't wrong to want it. She wanted stability. She wanted to be taken seriously. She wanted a clear path in a world that felt enormous and unmapped. Those wants made complete sense for who she was at the time. I outgrew the dream. I didn't fail it. Marcy said something on the podcast last week that genuinely hasn't left me since. She said, when you're writing down your intentions and one of them doesn't feel quite right as you're writing it, don't just push through and finish the sentence. Cross it out and go deeper. Ask yourself why you actually want this. Does it matter to you? Or does it matter to who you imagine is watching? Would you still want it if nobody else ever found out you'd achieved it? Are you chasing the actual thing, or are you chasing the feeling you're hoping it's going to hand you? A feeling you might already be able to get somewhere closer to home. I've started asking myself those questions about smaller things too, not just the big life direction ones. A goal for this show, a habit I picked up because someone I admire has it. It's uncomfortable, honestly, how many things get a little quieter and less urgent once you actually sit with why you wanted them. Maybe for you, it's not a law career. Maybe it's the corner office you decided you needed at 26, or the city you always said you'd move to, or the version of successful your family handed you before you even had a chance to define it yourself. Whatever it is, I want you to try Marcy's questions on it this week, honestly. You might find that the dream still holds up completely. Some do. But if it doesn't, that's not a crisis. That's just information you didn't have before. As I was writing this episode, I went to lunch with my husband, Casey, and we were talking about what I was writing. And he gave me an image for this one that really illustrates my point, so I want to share it with you. Militaries write war plans, very extensive, detailed, painstaking plans, while knowing going in that the plan will not survive contact with the enemy. There's an old line from a Prussian field marshal named Helmuth von Moltke, and his actual point, back in 1871, was that no plan of operations can extend with any real certainty past the first encounter with the enemy, because the enemy can react in any number of ways, and you have no idea how they will until they do. Over the decades, that got sharpened and shortened into a version you might have heard somewhere. No plan survives contact with the enemy. And here's the part that I love, and the part that I think we get completely backwards in our own lives. That quote is not military history's way of saying planning is pointless. It's the opposite. Militaries plan more rigorously than almost anyone, precisely because they know the plan is going to fork. Modern military planning is built around that assumption from the very first draft. Plans are written with decision points and branches baked directly into them, moments where the plan is expected to split depending on what actually happens once boots are on the ground. Nobody hands a general a single, unbroken line to the objective and calls it done. The plan is flexible by design because the people writing it know that there are more variables in play than anyone sitting at a desk could ever predict. There's actually a term for this in the military planning. They call it branches and sequels. A branch is the built-in option for what you do if the situation shifts mid-plan. A sequel is what comes next once the current phase resolves, whichever way it resolves. Nobody treats needing a branch as evidence the original plan was badly written or that they have failed. It's the opposite. A plan without branches is the one that was badly written because it pretended the future was more knowable than it actually is. That's your life. That's my life. You are not failing when your plan forks. That was always going to happen to every single person, regardless of how carefully they wrote the plan in the first place. The plan was never supposed to be a straight, unbroken line from where you are to some fixed destination. It was supposed to be a starting position, a best guess made with the information you had, flexible enough to bend the moment new information showed up. When my internship blew up my law school plan, that wasn't the plan failing. That was the plan making contact with the enemy, exactly the way plans do. When I found out I couldn't have children, that wasn't a life plan collapsing either, even though it felt exactly like that for a long time. It was the sequel showing up before I was ready to write it, and it took me a while, but I did eventually write it. We also carry around this belief that transformation happens the moment we launch the plan. Like the plan itself is the magic ingredient. And all we have to do is finish writing it and press go. Think about New Year's resolutions. New year, new me. I'm going to lose the weight. I'm going to work out every day. I'm going to finally become the person I keep meaning to be starting January 1st at midnight. We treat the launch date like it's doing the work. But the real transformation doesn't start at launch. It never has, not once in my entire life or in anyone else's. I've watched closely. It starts the moment you stopped insisting your future has to look like your past. The moment you stop measuring every new possibility against the version of yourself you've already decided you are. It starts when you're finally open enough to notice an opportunity you would have completely ignored a year ago. Because a year ago, you weren't looking for it. The plan doesn't transform you. The noticing does. The willingness does. And that's a hard sell because launch dates are satisfying in a way that ongoing noticing just isn't. A launch date gives you a clean before and after. It gives you a story to tell. Nobody posts day one of slowly becoming more open to things I would have ignored last year. But that's the actual mechanism every single time I've watched someone's life genuinely change. Not the dramatic reset, but the months of small noticing that made the reset unnecessary by the time it would have happened. This is exactly where hustle culture does real damage. And I say that as someone who has absolutely lived it. Building something, a business, a body, a career, it often demands that you focus on just that one thing at the cost of everything else. Relationships get the leftover version of you. Hobbies disappear first because they feel optional. Health and sleep get treated like line items that you'll get back to later. And then, if you're lucky enough that the thing actually works, you look up one day and you realize you've built something you don't even enjoy anymore because you sacrificed the exact person who was supposed to enjoy it. Success shouldn't require destroying the person who built it. That's the entire reason I called this show Living Life Unpaused. You are a whole person, not a project with a single deliverable. And I think that's the thing most of us forget the second we decide to go after one big goal. We chase the one thing, and everything else we also wanted in life quietly gets paused while we chase it. And we tell ourselves we'll unpause it later, once the one thing is finished. Except the finish line keeps moving, and later has a way of never actually arriving. So here's a question for you, if you want to sit with it this week. If this thing you're building actually worked out exactly the way that you're hoping, if it hit every number, every milestone, every version of done you've imagined, who would be standing there to enjoy it? Would that person still have the friendships, the hobbies, the health, the marriage, whatever it is you've quietly set down to get here? If the honest answer makes you wince a little, that's not a reason to quit what you're building. It's just a sign it might be time to let a few of those other things back into the plan, instead of waiting for permission that's never going to arrive on its own. So here's what I want you to walk away with today. You don't need your whole life planned out. You need a version of what you're building toward. Loose, changeable, allowed to be wrong. And you need your very next step. Just the next one. And you need to take it. The step shows you the one after it, the way headlights only show you as far as the headlights reach. And that's always been enough to get someone home at night. That's how you build a life actively instead of on paper. Not in a 5-year plan that you might abandon by March, feeling like you failed something you never should have written down as fixed in the first place. But in motion, one step revealing the next, adjusting the whole way through. That's Kaizen. That's a war plan that expects to fork with branches and sequels. You're always becoming. You're never finished. And that was never failure. That was always supposed to be the design. If you take nothing else from today, take this. The theme is more honest than the title. The fork in the plan is the plan working. And the version of you who wrote the original plan did the best you could with what you knew at the time. You don't need to finish your plan. You just need to get going. So before we wrap up, I want to make this practical because it's easy to nod along to an episode like this one and then close the app and do absolutely nothing differently. So instead of asking yourself where you'll be in 5 years, try asking these 3 questions instead. First, what's my next right step? Not my final destination, not the whole staircase, just the next stair. It should be small enough that you could actually take it this week, not someday. If your honest next step is send one email or have one conversation or look up one class, that counts. Smaller is better because smaller actually happens. Second, what's my theme? Not my title. Look back over the last several years, not just your resume, all of it. And notice what verb keeps showing up no matter what the job title said. That verb is more reliable than any specific plan you could ever write because it survives the plan changing. And third, if this forked tomorrow, would I still be okay? Not thrilled or unbothered, just okay. If the honest answer is no, that's not a reason to panic. It's information. It usually means you've built something too brittle, too dependent on everything going exactly right, and it might be worth building in a branch or two before you actually need one. This week, your assignment is this. Write down your next right step, and then before the week is out, take it. Remember to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. We've got more interviews and more solo episodes lined up that you won't want to miss. Next week, you'll hear from someone who's actually lived every bit of this. Shannon Hoffman has built multiple successful businesses, and now she spends her time coaching entrepreneurs who are building their own. We're going to talk about some of the mistakes that she sees people make and what her advice is for those. We've got a lot more planned that you won't want to miss. See you here every Monday. Stop wishing, start moving, and keep living your life unpaused. Until next week, be careful out there.